The crystal chandelier above the reception hall caught the light just right, casting a soft glow over the crowd of 150 guests. The clink of champagne glasses and the hum of polite conversation filled the air at the sprawling Napa Valley estate. I stood quietly in my simple gray dress, clutching a glass of sparkling wine, watching my son Owen dance with his new bride, Claire. At 58, I'd learned to blend into moments like these, to be present but unnoticed. But then, Claire's voice cut through the music like a knife. And of course, we're so grateful to have Owen's mother here, she said into the microphone, her smile sharp and practiced. Even if she's, well, a bit of a family disgrace we're stuck with. A ripple of awkward laughter spread through the room. My glass trembled in my hand, the wine sloshing slightly. 200 eyes turned to me. The 58-year-old widow in a modest dress, standing alone near the dessert table. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. But I kept my face calm, my smile steady. I'd spent 12 years perfecting the art of staying invisible, and I wasn't about to let Claire Donovan unravel that now. Then, something unexpected happened. Claire's mother, Helen Ramsey, standing near the head table in her elegant silk gown, froze. Her champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips, and her face went pale as the linen tablecloths. Her eyes locked onto mine with a look I hadn't seen in years, recognition, mixed with something like fear. "Barbara," she whispered, barely audible, but the word hit me like a thunderclap. "If you're listening to this, I hope you'll stick with me. My name is Barbara Lawson, Barb to most people who know me well. And trust me, this story is about to get a lot more interesting. If you're watching, let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear from you. Let me take you back to how we ended up here. Because this moment, this single, humiliating moment, was the spark that lit everything else. I'm 58, a widow, and for the last 12 years, I've lived what most people would call a quiet life. A small house in the suburbs, a reliable car, clothes from department stores, nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention. But Claire's words at her wedding weren't just a casual jab. They were a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. And Helen's reaction? That was the first crack in the carefully built wall I'd spent over a decade constructing. Owen, my 34-year-old son, had been dating Claire for just 9 months when they announced their engagement. I'd met her only a handful of times, brief dinners where she'd smile politely but ask pointed questions about my life. "Do you manage okay on your own, Barb?" she'd say, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like judgment. "It must be hard, living so simply." I'd nod, sip my wine, and change the subject. I'd learned long ago that the best way to keep certain truths private was to let people see exactly what they expected. A widow getting by on her late husband's modest pension. The wedding itself was breathtaking. The Ramsey estate in Napa Valley stretched across acres of vineyards, with a garden that must have cost a fortune to maintain. Claire floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her blonde hair catching the sunlight like a halo. Owen, my boy, looked happier than I'd seen him since his father, Edward, passed away. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a gray dress, elegant but understated, paired with a simple silver necklace that had belonged to my mother. Nothing to stand out, nothing to raise questions. But during the reception, as I sat at a corner table watching Owen twirl Claire across the dance floor, I noticed Helen Ramsey sizing me up. Her eyes lingered on my dress, my jewelry, my posture, like she was trying to place me in her world of wealth and status. I brushed it off. I was used to those looks. Then Claire approached, her parents in tow, her smile as bright as the chandelier above us. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice sugary enough to make my teeth ache. "This is Owen's mother, Barb." That's when it happened. "The family disgrace we're stuck with," she said, her laugh light but cutting, her hand grazing my shoulder as if to soften the blow. The room seemed to hold its breath. I felt every gaze, every whisper, like pinpricks on my skin. But before I could respond, Helen's voice broke the silence. "Barbara Lawson?" she said again, louder this time, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite read. You're the one from the art auction, aren't you?" The air shifted. Claire's smile faltered, her confidence cracking just enough for me to notice. Owen looked confused, glancing between his new mother-in-law and me. And I felt my stomach twist. Because in that moment, I knew my carefully guarded secret was about to unravel. Helen's recognition wasn't just a passing comment. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Something I'd spent 12 years trying to keep buried. I stood there, my heart pounding, as the orchestra played on and the guests returned to their conversations. But I could feel it, the weight of Helen's stare, the sudden uncertainty in Claire's eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible anymore, and while part of me wanted to slip out the door and disappear into the night, another part, the part that had been quiet for too long, was ready to face whatever came next. Let me take you back. Because to understand what happened at that wedding reception, you need to know who I really am, and why I've spent so long keeping it quiet. My name is Barbara Lawson, but most folks just call me Barb. At 58, I've learned that the best way to protect what matters is to let people see only what they expect. A simple dress, a modest home, a life that doesn't raise eyebrows. But behind that, there's a story I've kept hidden for 12 years, one that started with love, loss, and a decision that changed everything. Back in the 1990s, my husband Edward and I were a team. Not just in marriage, but in work. We were investigative journalists, the kind who'd spend months chasing a lead, digging through records, piecing together stories that powerful people didn't want told. Edward had this quiet intensity, a way of seeing through the noise to the truth. I loved that about him. We worked for a small paper in San Francisco, scraping by but happy, until one story changed our lives. It was 1997, and we uncovered a massive financial scandal, executives at a major bank funneling money through offshore accounts. We didn't just break the story, we turned it into a book. That book, The Hidden Vault, hit the shelves in 2008 and became a bestseller. By the time the royalties settled, we'd made $15 million. $15 million. It was more money than Edward and I had ever dreamed of. We were in our early 40s then. With our son Owen just starting college, we could have bought a mansion, a yacht, all the things people think wealth looks like. But Edward and I weren't like that. We'd spent our lives exposing greed, and we weren't about to become the people we'd written about. Instead, we made a choice. We told Owen we'd gotten a decent settlement from the book, enough to live comfortably. But nothing extravagant. He was 18, full of dreams about building his own career as a software engineer. He didn't need to know the full truth. Not then. We wanted him to carve his own path, to value hard work over handouts. So we moved to a quiet suburb outside Napa, bought a cozy house, and kept our lives simple. Edward drove a beat-up old sedan, I shopped at Macy's sales. To the world, we were just a couple of retired journalists living off a modest nest egg. But behind the scenes, we were building something bigger. Edward had a knack for spotting opportunities, and I wasn't half bad at it myself. We took that $15 million and started investing. At first, it was safe bets, blue-chip stocks, real estate in up-and-coming areas. Then we got bolder. Art was our passion, so we backed galleries, funded emerging artists, bought pieces at auctions through anonymous trusts. By 2015, when Edward got sick, our portfolio was worth $200 million. $200 million. I still remember sitting by his hospital bed, holding his hand, promising I'd keep our secret safe. He died that fall, and a piece of me went with him. After Edward passed, I could have stopped. I could have lived quietly, grieving, letting the money sit, but that wasn't who we were. I kept going, honoring him by growing what we'd built together. I studied the markets, learned the art world inside out, and invested in projects that felt meaningful, museums, community art programs, even a few tech startups with solid ideas. By the time Owen got married, our portfolio, my portfolio, was worth over $600 million. $600 million. It's a number that still feels unreal, even to me. But here's the thing about wealth, it doesn't look like what people expect. They imagine diamonds, private jets, flashy labels. They don't picture a woman in a sensible gray dress, driving a 10-year-old Honda, living in a house with a slightly leaky roof. That's exactly what I counted on. For 12 years, I'd been invisible, not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to protect Owen. I wanted him to build his life on his own terms, not on the weight of our money. And I wanted to honor Edward's belief that real power isn't in showing off, it's in making a difference quietly. That's why Claire's words at the wedding hit so hard. Family disgrace. She didn't just insult me, she dismissed everything I'd worked to protect. I'd met Claire only a few times before the wedding. She was 30, sharp as a tack, with a designer wardrobe and a smile that could charm anyone. But her questions always had an edge. "Barb, do you ever think about downsizing?" she'd ask, eyeing my modest living room. "It must be tough managing on your own." I'd smile, deflect, keep my cards close. I knew her type, ambitious, calculating, always looking for an angle. But I never thought she'd call me out in front of a room full of strangers. And then there was Helen Ramsey, Claire's mother. That look on her face when she said my name, it wasn't just surprise. It was the kind of recognition that makes your heart skip a beat. 3 years ago, I'd attended an art auction in San Francisco. One of those exclusive events where millionaires bid on paintings worth more than most people's homes. I was there as a representative of an anonymous trust, bidding on a rare impressionist piece. I'd kept a low profile, letting my attorneys handle the spotlight. But Helen was there too, running her gallery. She didn't know my name then, but she'd seen me, and something about that moment stuck with her. When she whispered, "Barbara," at the reception, I knew she was piecing it together. I wasn't just Owen's unassuming mother. I was the woman who'd outbid half the room for a $50 million painting. The one whose trust had quietly saved her struggling gallery from bankruptcy a few years back. Claire didn't know it yet, but her mother's reaction was the first domino to fall. My carefully built world of discretion was starting to crack, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come next. I left the reception early that night, claiming a headache. The truth was, I needed to think. I drove home in my old Honda, the Napa Valley hills dark and quiet around me, replaying Helen's words, Claire's smirk, the weight of all those eyes. For 12 years, I'd kept my secret to protect my son, to honor my husband, to live a life that felt true to who we were. But now, someone had seen through the curtain. And if Helen Ramsey had recognized me, it was only a matter of time before Claire started digging. As I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the stars through my windshield. I could feel it, the calm before the storm. Claire thought she'd humiliated me, but she had no idea what she'd just set in motion. I wasn't just a widow with a modest pension. I was Barbara Lawson, the woman who'd built a fortune from a single book and a lifetime of careful choices. And if Claire wanted to play games, she was about to learn I'd been playing and winning for a lot longer than she had. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to the familiar hum of my quiet suburban life. The sun filtered through my kitchen curtains, and I sipped coffee from a chipped mug Edward and I had bought on a road trip years ago. But the peace I usually found in these moments was gone. Claire's words, "family disgrace," echoed in my head, sharp and stinging, and Helen Ramsey's whispered recognition? That was a warning bell I couldn't ignore. I knew something was coming. Something I'd spent 12 years trying to avoid. If you've ever had a moment when you felt the ground shift beneath you, you'll understand. I wasn't just Barb, the unassuming widow anymore. Someone had seen me, and that meant trouble. Owen called me that afternoon, his voice tight with confusion. "Mom, what happened last night? Claire's been acting strange, and her mom pulled me aside to ask about you. She kept mentioning some art auction." I could hear the strain in his voice. The way he used to sound as a kid when he sensed I was keeping something from him. I brushed it off, told him it was probably a misunderstanding. But my mind was racing. Helen Ramsey wasn't just making small talk. She was connecting dots, and I had a sinking feeling Claire was about to pick up the pencil. Claire was sharp, I'll give her that. At 30, she'd built a name for herself as an interior designer. The kind who could walk into a room and make it look like a magazine spread. But there was always something calculating about her, like she was sizing up everyone and everything for profit. In the months leading up to the wedding, she'd dropped hints about money, subtle at first, then bolder. "Owen's doing well as a software engineer," she'd say, "but it must be nice to have family support." "Right, Barb?" I'd smile, nod, keep my answers vague. I'd learned long ago that people like Claire thrive on information, and I wasn't about to give her any. But Helen's reaction at the reception changed everything. A week after the wedding, I got a call from my financial advisor, Nancy Wheeler. I'd known Nancy for years. She was one of the few people who understood the full scope of what Edward and I had built. "Barb," she said, her voice low and serious. "Someone's been poking around your investment trusts. They're asking questions about the art purchases, the real estate holdings, even the shell companies you used for anonymity. This isn't casual curiosity. It's professional." My stomach tightened. "Who's behind it?" I asked, though I already had a guess. Nancy paused, then said, "I can't say for sure. But the inquiries are coming from a firm that specializes in corporate asset tracing. And, well, they've been in contact with a lawyer who handles family wealth disputes." I didn't need her to spell it out. Claire was digging, and she wasn't doing it alone. I sat down at my kitchen table, staring at the worn wood where Edward and I used to plan our investments over late-night coffee. I'd always known keeping my wealth a secret would come with risks. But I hadn't expected it to unravel like this, at my son's wedding, of all places. I called Owen that evening, trying to gauge how much he knew. "Mom," he said, sounding exhausted, "Claire's been asking me all sorts of questions about Dad's work, the book, our family's finances. She keeps saying we need to plan for the future. But it feels off." That off feeling was the same one I'd had since Claire's speech at the reception. Owen was smart, like his father, but he was trusting, too. He'd fallen for Claire's charm, her polished exterior, her promises of a perfect life together. But I could see what he couldn't. Claire wasn't just planning a future with him. She was planning a future with my money. A few days later, I got a text from Claire. "Barb, I'd love for us to have lunch soon. Just the three of us, me, you, and Owen. There are some family matters we should discuss now that we're all connected." Her words were polite, but I could hear the edge behind them. Even through a screen, I showed the message to Owen, watching his face shift from confusion to concern. "What does she want to talk about?" he asked. I shrugged, keeping my voice light. "I'm sure she just wants to get to know me better," I said, but inside, I was bracing myself. Claire wasn't the type to let a mystery go unsolved, especially if she thought there was money involved. Sure enough, lunch was anything but casual. Claire chose the most expensive restaurant in Napa, a place where the cheapest entree cost more than my weekly groceries. She was waiting when Owen and I arrived, seated at a corner table with a view of the entire room. Her designer dress catching the afternoon light. "Barb, Owen, so glad you could make it," she said, her smile as bright as ever. But her eyes? They were scanning me, taking in my simple blouse, my plain silver earrings, like she was looking for cracks in my armor. We ordered, and Claire wasted no time. "I was talking to Mom about her gallery," she said, swirling her wine glass. "She mentioned seeing you at an art auction a few years back. Barb, something about a major purchase, a painting. I think? $50 million? Her tone was casual, but her gaze was anything but. Owen glanced at me, his brow furrowing. I sipped my water, letting the silence stretch. "That's interesting," I said finally. "I don't recall being at any auctions like that. Must have been someone who looked like me." Claire's smile didn't waver, but I saw the gears turning. "Maybe," she said, "but Mom's sure it was you. She said you were with some attorneys, representing a trust. And then there's the fact that her gallery was saved from bankruptcy 3 years ago by an anonymous donor. Funny how things connect, isn't it?" I kept my face neutral, but my heart was pounding. Helen had remembered more than I'd thought. 3 years ago, I'd funneled money through a trust to save her gallery, not out of charity, but because it was a sound investment. The gallery had a loyal clientele and a prime location, it just needed better management. I'd never told Helen it was me, and I'd counted on staying anonymous. But now Claire was connecting the dots, and she was doing it fast. Owen shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Claire, what's this about?" he asked. She ignored him, her eyes locked on me. "I studied business at Stanford," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I find investments fascinating, especially when they're discreet. Like, say, a trust that buys up art or saves struggling businesses. It makes you wonder what else might be hidden." I set down my glass, meeting her gaze. "Discreet investments are just good business," I said calmly. "People with money often prefer to keep it private. It's practical, not suspicious. Claire's smile tightened, and I knew she wasn't buying my deflection. She'd already hired investigators, maybe even a lawyer, and she was building a case, not just to uncover my wealth, but to get her hands on it. That night, I called Nancy again. They're getting closer, I told her. Claire's not just curious, she's strategic. Nancy sighed on the other end of the line. Barb, I've seen this before. She's probably expecting a windfall, maybe thinks she can pressure you into sharing for family unity. But there's something else. My contacts say she's taken out loans recently. Big ones. To fund this investigation. She's betting it'll pay off. I stared out my kitchen window at the dark Napa Hills, the weight of it all settling over me. Claire wasn't just digging into my past, she was gambling her future on it. And Owen? He was caught in the middle, starting to see the cracks in his new wife's facade. I'd spent 12 years protecting him from the truth about our wealth. But now I wondered if that had been a mistake. Because Claire wasn't just coming for me, she was coming for everything I'd built. And if I didn't act soon, she might just tear it all down. The conference room in Nancy Wheeler's downtown Napa office smelled faintly of leather and coffee. But the air was thick with tension. I sat at one end of the polished mahogany table, my hands folded calmly in my lap, though my heart was racing. Across from me were Claire Donovan, my son Owen, and Claire's parents, Helen and George Ramsey. Claire's lawyer, a slick man named Victor Price, sat beside her, a stack of documents spread out like a battle plan. Owen's eyes darted between us, his face a mix of confusion and dread. At 58, I'd faced tough moments before. But this felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, with everything I'd built over 12 years hanging in the balance. Claire started, her voice smooth as silk but sharp underneath. Barb, we're here because family matters should be handled openly, she said, glancing at her lawyer for effect. Now that Owen and I are married, I think it's time we discuss how our family's resources can be shared responsibly. Her smile was radiant, the kind that could sell $1 million penthouse. But her eyes were cold, calculating. She thought she had me cornered. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. Shared responsibly? I asked, letting the words hang in the air. What exactly do you mean, Claire? Owen shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He'd barely spoken since we arrived, but I could see the weight of the last few weeks pressing down on him. Claire's questions, her insistence on family planning, the growing suspicion that his new wife wasn't who he thought she was. Victor Price cleared his throat, sliding a document across the table. Ms. Donovan is proposing a family foundation, he said, his voice clipped and professional. A structure to manage shared assets for charitable purposes, with a board of trustees including you, Ms. Lawson, as well as Claire and Owen. It would require an initial contribution, say, $40 million, to establish credibility in the arts community. $40 million. The number landed like a punch, and I heard Owen's sharp intake of breath. Claire, what are you talking about? He asked, his voice low but edged with frustration. Mom doesn't have that kind of money. Claire's smile didn't falter, but she ignored him, her eyes locked on me. Oh, I think Barb might surprise us, she said. My mother mentioned something about an art auction. Didn't you, Mom? A $50 million painting, purchased by a trust that sounds awfully familiar. Helen Ramsey flushed, her hands twisting in her lap. I just thought I recognized Barb from that event. She stammered. The woman who bid on that Monet, she was so discreet. But her presence, it was you, wasn't it, Barb? The room went quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Owen turned to me, his brown eyes, Edward's eyes, searching my face for answers. Mom, he said, barely above a whisper. What's she talking about? I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of 12 years of secrecy pressing against my chest. Claire thought she'd caught me, thought she'd unraveled my carefully built life. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table with deliberate calm. Claire, I said, my voice steady, before we talk about foundations or shared assets, let me share something with you. I opened the folder, revealing a report Nancy had prepared. This is a record of your recent activities, I said, sliding it toward her. 2 weeks ago, you hired a private investigation firm to dig into my financial history. You've been tracing my trusts, my art purchases, even my real estate holdings. Expensive work. By the way, especially since you took out 3 new loans to fund it. Claire's smile froze, her perfect composure cracking. Victor Price leaned forward, his brow furrowing. But I kept going. You also consulted a law firm that specializes in family wealth disputes. Planning to challenge my assets. Maybe? Or force me into a settlement? Owen's face went pale. Claire, you hired investigators? He asked. His voice breaking. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting to her lawyer for help. It's not what it sounds like, she said quickly. I was just trying to understand our family's situation. For all of us. For all of us? I repeated, my tone soft but cutting. Or for you? I pulled out another document. This one, a financial profile of the Ramsey family. Your parents' gallery has been struggling for years. It was nearly bankrupt 3 years ago, until an anonymous donor stepped in with a $10 million infusion. That donor kept the gallery afloat, saved your family's reputation, even funded the museum where you worked. Claire, I paused, letting the words sink in. That donor was me. The room erupted in silence so loud it felt like a scream. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You? She whispered. You were the one who saved my gallery? Claire's face drained of color, her confidence crumbling like a house of cards. Owen stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if seeing me for the first time. And Victor Price? He was flipping through his papers, looking for a way to salvage his client's plan. I leaned forward, my voice calm but unwavering. I'm not just a widow living on a pension. Claire, I'm the anonymous patron who's been funding half the art scene in California for the last decade. The Monet at the auction? I bought it. The museum where you built your career? I backed it. And your mother's gallery? It's still standing because of me. Claire's eyes widened, her perfect facade shattering. That's impossible. She stammered. You're just a family disgrace? I finished for her, my voice steady but laced with steel. You called me that in front of 150 people. Claire, you thought I was an easy target, someone you could manipulate, but you made a mistake. I turned to Owen, my heart aching at the confusion in his eyes. Owen, I never told you about the money because I wanted you to build your own life. Your father and I, we made that choice together. But Claire's been digging, and she's not doing it for love. I slid one final document across the table, a contract. Here's my offer, I said, looking directly at Claire. $4 million, one-time payment. You walk away from Owen. Sign an agreement never to contact us again. And I'll make sure your parents keep their gallery and their home. Refuse, and you'll face the consequences of the loans you took out. The investigations you started, and the legal battles you won't win. The silence was deafening. Owen's hands were shaking as he stared at the contract. Claire's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she barely seemed to hear him. Helen looked like she wanted to disappear, her face a mix of gratitude and shame. And Owen? He turned to Claire, his voice raw. Did you marry me because you loved me? Or because you thought there was money to be had? Claire's mouth opened, but no words came. That silence, it said everything. I watched my son's heart break. And it took everything in me not to reach for him, to pull him close like I did when he was a boy. Instead, I stood, gathering my papers. You have 48 hours to decide, I said to Claire. After that, the offer's off the table. As I walked out of that conference room, I felt the weight of 12 years lift. Just a little. I'd spent so long hiding who I was, protecting Owen, honoring Edward's memory, but Claire had pushed me too far. And now the truth was out. The question was, what would she do with it? And what would Owen do when he realized the woman he'd married wasn't who he thought she was? I drove home that evening, the Napa Hills stretching out under a sky streaked with pink and gold. For the first time in years, I felt exposed, raw, like a wound that had been hidden too long. But I also felt something else, resolve. Claire thought she could outmaneuver me, but she'd underestimated the woman she'd called a disgrace. And if she thought this was the end, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next morning, at exactly 11:32 a.m., Nancy Wheeler's office called. Claire had accepted the deal. $4 million, wired to her account. in exchange for signing papers that ensured she'd disappear from our lives forever. No further contact with Owen. No more digging into my finances. No more schemes. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the chipped mug I'd been drinking from since Edward and I were newlyweds. And felt, not triumph, but relief, like a storm had passed, leaving the air clearer, but the ground still muddy with what it had cost us. Owen filed for divorce the next week, citing irreconcilable differences, and just like that, Claire Donovan was gone, as if she'd never been part of our lives at all. The weeks that followed were quiet, but heavy. Owen moved back to his apartment in downtown Napa, needing space to sort through the wreckage of his marriage. He didn't say much, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, those same brown eyes Edward had. Full of questions he wasn't ready to ask. "Mom," he said one night over the phone, his voice raw, "how did I not see it? How did I miss who she was?" I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault. That love can blind even the smartest of us. But I knew he needed time to find those answers himself. So I just listened, the way I always had when he was struggling. I spent those weeks reflecting. For 12 years, I'd hidden my wealth to protect Owen. To honor Edward's belief that a good life is built on integrity. Not money, but keeping that secret had cost me. It had let someone like Claire walk into our lives, thinking she could manipulate us. It had left Owen questioning everything, not just his marriage, but me. I sat at my dining table one evening, a glass of Pinot Noir in hand, and spread out the financial records Nancy had sent me. The numbers told a story of patience, of choices Edward and I had made together. But they also told a story of isolation, of carrying a truth alone for too long. Then, about 8 months later, Owen called me on a Sunday evening, his voice lighter than it had been in months. "Mom," he said, "I met someone. Her name's Laura. She's a veterinarian, works with rescue animals. She's different." I could hear the smile in his voice, the kind I hadn't heard since before Claire. "She doesn't care about money or status. When I told her you live in a modest house and drive that old Honda, she said you sound like someone who's got life figured out." I laughed, feeling something loosen in my chest. Something that had been tight since that awful wedding reception. "She sounds wonderful," I said. "When do I get to meet her?" "Next Sunday," he replied. "But, Mom, when we have dinner, can you just be you? The mom who raised me to work hard and treat people right? Not whatever you were in that conference room." His words stung, but they also grounded me. He wasn't wrong. The Barb who'd faced down Claire with a $4 million offer was a side of me I'd kept hidden. Even from him. But maybe it was time to find a balance, to stop hiding, but still be the mother he needed. That dinner with Laura was everything I'd hoped for. She was warm, with a quick laugh and a kindness that radiated from her. Over plates of homemade pasta at my little dining table, she talked about her work saving stray dogs, her eyes lighting up with passion. Owen watched her with a softness I hadn't seen in years. And when Laura complimented my simple silver necklace, the one Edward gave me on our 10th anniversary, I felt a warmth I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "Barb," she said, "you've got this quiet strength about you. I bet you've got some stories to tell." I smiled, glancing at Owen. "Oh, a few," I said, keeping my tone light. He gave me a look, half warning, half amused, and I knew we'd be okay. A few weeks later, I made a decision I'd been mulling over for months. I called Nancy and told her I wanted to set up a scholarship fund for young artists. Under my own name, not a trust, not a shell company, but Barbara Lawson. It felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the shadows. The fund would support kids who, like Edward and I once were, had big dreams but little means. It was my way of honoring him, of reclaiming the truth I'd hidden for so long. For the first time, I wasn't just protecting my family, I was building something new. Something open. Looking back, I realize Claire's betrayal was a strange kind of gift. It forced me to face the cost of my secrecy, to see the damage it could do if left unchecked. It showed me that hiding who you are can keep you safe. But it can also keep you alone. I'd spent 12 years being invisible, thinking it was the best way to protect Owen, to honor Edward, but in that conference room, when I laid my truth bare, I wasn't just fighting Claire. I was fighting for my son, for our family, for the life we deserved to live, out in the open. unafraid. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the truth, even when it's heavy, has a way of setting you free. Not the kind of freedom that comes from money or power, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are and standing tall in it. For me, that meant being Barb, the widow, the mother, the woman who built a fortune from a single book and a lifetime of love. For Owen, it meant finding Laura, someone who loved him for his heart, not his bank account. And for you, listening to this story, I hope it means something. Too, maybe it's a reminder that the people who underestimate you don't define you. Or maybe it's a nudge to share your own story, to let your voice be heard. So, if you're out there, carrying a truth you've kept hidden, or healing from a betrayal that cut deep, know this: you're stronger than you think. You don't have to shout your worth to the world, but you don't have to hide it either. Find the people who see you for who you are, not what you have. And when the Claires of the world try to tear you down, remember, they're only as strong as the lies they tell themselves. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, share your own in the comments. Your voice matters.